Recently saw an article from a website called The Information about Amazon, rumours of Amazon selling Whitebox switches. In this Moving Pictures episode special, I want to think about all the different issues involved with this and whether this is actually possible and what the impacts of that might be. Amazon announces that they're going to do Whitebox switches, and that's not actually what necessarily is going to happen. What we're actually seeing is rumours of. Now, it's not impossible for Amazon to do this, but I do think it's worth considering all of the possible options that could happen if Amazon was to undertake this type of task. Now, it is true that Amazon designs its own and operates its own Ethernet switches. We know that from keynotes where at AWS, where they've stood up and talked about their infrastructure. They specifically called out that 5 years ago they weren't happy with the products that were available and then decided to build their own, and that's worked very well for them. It's brought the costs down and made their networks and their AWS cloud hosting much more reliable. They have their own switches built to their own specifications under their own quality control, running an operating system that works for them. They therefore have the capability, at least in paper, to sell Whitebox switches. Now, keep in mind that more than 30% of all switches sold today actually go into megascale data centers. Now, whether it's Alibaba or Tencent or Facebook or AWS, literally 1/3 of switches are heading into this market. So you could assume that AWS actually has significant buying power already today from that. Let's say it's 5 or 10% of the entire market. So they're already getting substantial manufacturing volumes and discount. They're already using their own warehousing capabilities to be able to stage and provision their own requirements. They're already placing orders on suppliers, on manufacturers. They're placing orders on designers to do things like make the boxes, make the airflow, build the chassis out. All that sort of stuff is all stuff that Amazon can and does do, and has the entire warehousing and provisioning system to do this. And of course, they have the computing chops to be able to apply developers to building out the capabilities to do whatever's needed to make these switches ready for retail or direct-to-customer sale. They've got a warehouse full of these things already for their proposed build-outs. Why not just light up the SKU in the public system and let other people buy them and then just ship them out, from the existing stocking? That's not rocket science for Amazon. You can sell more of them, then theoretically you reduce the cost of the switch, and then AWS has an advantage, a competitive advantage, because their switches get cheaper for the hardware component as they sell more of. Amazon as a business, they look at things as your profit margin is my advantage. They can do things cheaper, faster, more efficiently than just about any other company in the world so far, it would seem. And if they decide to move into a market, they do tend to win. Not always, they do fail occasionally, but they do tend to win. And when you look at enterprise IT networking sales, roughly 30 to 40% of the price of the product is actually sales and marketing. And the other 30 to 40% is actually just gross margin that goes to the bottom lines of these vendors. And there is a lot of fat in this business that could be taken out by somebody willing to approach. Amazon could sell at 1/3 the price for equivalent products from enterprise IT vendors that you know and love, and still be well recompensed and still be making money. Now, of course, they may sell a bit higher or a bit lesser if they feel they can get away with it. That principle does stand. It does make a lot more sense. 3 parts of what I'm going to talk about here today. I'm going to talk about how would they do it, or how they might do it. I'm going to talk about why they would do it, what it is that drives them to get into this and to consider this. What are the factors that might happen? What are the impacts if they go to market? Because I think there's 3 or 4 different ways they could go to market with this product that would make it work out. And then finally, are there any threats to this business model that they could put it together? And over the course of this, I'll actually ask the question is, are they actually going to sell Whitebox switches, or are they going to do something else? I think it's possible that they might just do some SD-WAN. Let's start off with how they would do it. Now, first of all, one way to do this would be to sell it unsupported as an Amazon Basics. You buy it as is, you can 0 question returns. If it's not working for you, you just send it back and Amazon gives you a refund, just like you buying for yourself. You buy some fancy electronic appliance, if you borrow it, and if you return it within a month, it's refundable. So that could be one way to do it. And look at what Amazon has done with its Amazon Basic series, say for batteries or a range of other products. It's certainly possible that in this environment you would see companies like Cumulus and IP Fusion and Pika 8, these types of companies could go forward and offer their network operating systems that they've been building out to customers to run on those switches. In other words, do the testing, do the certification necessary to prove that they will work. And this then becomes, you could buy your switch from Amazon and then you buy our operating system, you put them together yourself. That is definitely a possibility. We're also seeing SDN companies bringing their own NOSes. So instead of buying Whitebox switches from somebody else and putting their NOS on, or partnering with companies like Dell, to put their, to sell the switch and then again putting their own NOS on. We might see them start to turn to Amazon switches and say to their enterprise customers or their telco customers, why don't you just go and buy some switches from there, and then we'll provide you with the SDN and the network operating system, and away you go. What sort of companies would do that? Well, there's two that I think are interesting. One is Big Switch, who of course are leading the Open Network Linux project. They have their Big Switch Fabric, Big Mon, and Big Secure products. They could actually just turn it on top of these switches and away you would go. Would drop the cost in for customers who are willing to buy from Amazon. That would certainly work. Another one that you haven't heard of is Metaswitch. Metaswitch is a telco environment largely working on the voice side of the legacy voice. They actually have an SDN system they call composable networking, and they're now building operating systems that run on OPX. And they could certainly turn to this sort of thing. So those are the sorts of examples. There's plenty of other companies out there doing SDN and putting it on top of somebody's Whitebox. They could do that. So unsupported is one possible model. Supported, Amazon could certainly choose to build out an organization to provide support for these products. They haven't done that before. You would think that if it made sense to do it for networking, they would have done it for servers, for x86 servers. Why not sell x86s, Amazon branded? It doesn't. This is why I'm a little bit cagey about the Ethernet switch thing. But it would certainly be possible to keep the product simple. So maybe offer a simple, say, L3 routing with none of the legacy layer 2 protocol supports that cause so much problems. They're so unreliable and very tricky and require lots of customer hand-holding. Just leave the legacy market to the legacy companies if you want to look at it at that sort of a way. Amazon's not typically done much support for products, but getting AWS to grow might mean doing something to bridge to the enterprise. AWS wants to get into the enterprise. They want enterprises to come onto AWS Cloud. So it is possible that, by starting to build more relationships and satisfy more of what these people want, that you could get a product. AWS does have a lot of customers who talk about being all in with AWS. So could these customers be asking AWS to help them with their legacy architecture? It's also possible here, and this is one of the areas that I'm starting to question, is AWS is also looking for ways to bring them on. We need you to help us build the WAN into your environments. We can't just build it over the internet. We have these problems. We have these legacy apps. Today, they're turning to SD-WAN vendors, and that's not working out very well. Their direct connect services are not working very well. They're very difficult to use, very hard to route, requires a lot of expertise, and causes a lot of problems. It doesn't allow enterprises to be all in on AWS when you have to go through these baffles of complexity that make it very hard to integrate. It's also possible, we've got to put this through a distortion filter. There may be some kernel of truth here, and it's not necessarily a 48 port 10 gig switch that they're talking about. They could just be talking about a network appliance, in which case they might be talking about SD-WAN. This could be in the home market. If you're willing to just sell switches, perhaps you're actually willing to say, I want to see some sort of home switch that I could sell. So an 8 port, 12 port, 24 port switch suitable for the home market. Why would I do that? Well, increasingly IoT and connected devices. Up until now, we've tended to rely on Wi-Fi for all of these things. But there are places where you need an 8 port or 12 port switch, a central core around which everything can run. So it is possible Amazon's got its eyes on the IoT market, where at the edge of the network it wants something that's a little bit campus-like or a little bit edge. And that again would be part of this IoT edge build-out that Amazon's got. Maybe they're looking at something in that space. And the fourth place where you might want to do it, or how you might come to market with this, is telcos. We know that many telcos are looking at Whitebox for edge networking using open source technologies for the network operating systems and SDN controllers. At the same time, they don't want to be going out to China and then bulk ordering switches and then having to warehouse them and distribute them themselves. This could be something that AWS could do. They could build out the switch, have all this stock sitting, set up in a relationship with the telcos who just say, could you please ship me 10 units to this address, 5 units to this address? And if they're cheap enough, these telcos won't need to actually have spares. They just order replacements or negotiate deals with AWS to just rotate them or throw them away as whatever. Amazon would be combining there as its time and place distribution network of a large number of products that are consistent, going to a small number of very large customers, aka telcos, who need them at the edge of the network. That would lead into a discussion around x86 servers as well, because that's the other side of it. Amazon's already got substantial manufacturing and design expertise in the x86 servers and the natural complement to this. So perhaps they're doing switches, and then the complement is to bring x86 servers out afterwards as this works. x86 servers requires a lot more effort, I think, in terms of capital. This doesn't try a lot to do switches. The volumes are limited. Can't see how it goes. Why would AWS do this? What is it that's driven? I've hinted at a couple of the reasons on how they come to market, and the way they come to market would also provide some insight. I think part of it is that AWS migration and integration. Enterprises are struggling to make the move from the existing enterprise IT infrastructure into cloud. AWS forces you to work their way. You can't do it your way in the cloud. You have to fit into their model, and that means a transformation or an adaptation or a modification of every single service. So maybe this is a way of offering a service. This brings me back to the SD-WAN or the connectivity piece, which is quite challenging in AWS. Their networking is dramatically different from normal networking, and the competency of people in enterprise IT to understand that's fairly limited and takes a long time. AWS also has a substantial benefit of volume. If they could double the volume of units that they buy, they could see substantial cost reductions in their data centers. This has simple benefits for the cost of their existing AWS infrastructure. They're already doing it. If you're going to sell more of the same thing, then it just gets cheaper in theory, or they get the ability to spin faster, because if they buy in a product, they sell it, they can order more, and they can iterate on the technology a lot quicker, get the more modern, the fresher technology. But I do think it's basically a volume game. The more chips you can buy from Broadcom, the larger the run that they can manufacture, the cheaper the unit price. Silicon and ASICs is very much a volume aspect to it. This is recruitment. Very few people have skills on Whitebox today, and Amazon and Google and Facebook, for that matter, all recruit heavily from enterprise IT. They need staff to come in. Their demand for staff is just phenomenal. Now, building a network operating system is not particularly hard. It's not artificial intelligence hard. It's not global database hard, because it's a small unit that goes into a thing. And, you know, we've seen startups with half a dozen people build a NOS inside of a few months. And even now, we've got people rolling their own. It doesn't take much at all for an enterprise with some good funding and some top-notch people can start rolling their own network operating system, and I've heard of people actually doing that. But the cost of recruiting the right people and training them inside of a company like Amazon is very high. That is the cost of recruiting and going through the process of interviews and locating, you know, dozens of people to get down to one possible person is very difficult. And then if you've then got to train them, you're then looking at 3, 6, 12 months before they come up to speed. That's a substantial cost for a business which is betting on a lot of growth. It also has to be said that working at Amazon is not pleasant. It's not nice. It is a pressure cooker environment that forces people to overwork. And if you're not willing to overwork, they have a kind of a stack ranking system where the bottom 10% just get forced out all the time. The average length of employment in Amazon is roughly 2 years. Overall, I've seen some different research. So that might give you a hint that recruiting costs are serious. Open source. Amazon doesn't have to do a lot of your work here. They can take existing open source products and bundle them together. We've seen Amazon do that consistently with their databases, with their storage, with their web services, all the software that they run. Some of it's developed in-house, but largely the bulk of the work is actually open source, and they contribute very little back. Overall, and that hasn't changed. They see their software platform as their competitive advantage, and committing back doesn't really help. So I do think that Amazon can quickly turn into a networking vendor pretty quickly, certainly for something as simple as a switch. Something more complex as an edge router, possibly. Something as an SD-WAN. Well, you know, at the same time, we've seen plenty of vendors turn themselves into SD-WAN companies in just a couple of years, and somebody like Amazon could certainly emulate that sort of strategy if they felt like. Most of the elements of these of a simple SD-WAN strategy is actually available on the market to be bought, acquired, or purchased. So they may choose to do that. And then finally, one more reason as to why they would do it. I don't think this is a key reason, but there was a certain amount of antagonism. When you watch certain people from AWS talk in their keynotes about networking, you do get a sense of real frustration and real disappointment in their previous working with networking vendors, and that they aren't moving at very fast, that they're holding the industry back, that cloud networking isn't progressing because these companies are holding back. And this may actually be a way to just kick them in the pants. There's a factor there of saying, you're not changing fast enough, so therefore we're going to move in and give you a shake it up. And even if Amazon doesn't really shake up this market, just making this move or getting this rumor out there is actually quite damaging. So we already saw Cisco lose $11 billion of market capital just because 5% drop in share price, just because of the rumor that this is happening. So now Cisco will have a very high level of motivation to jump in on this and make the move to get something happening here in the multi-cloud environment. Now, they are already doing so, but they're not really working at speed. They're not dragging their customers along. Those customers who are saying, I want to stay where I am, they're not forcing the move forward. So I think antagonism is certainly there. If AWS isn't satisfied, they certainly are bitter about where they were 5 years ago and having to vet their own networking, and the fact that they feel very let down by the traditional vendors, and now they're moving forward. So this might be another way of saying, partly, or I don't think this is the only reason, but just getting mad at their suppliers might be a reason for motivating this. Who gets impacted here? Let's have some thinking about who gets impacted. Obviously the vendors are going to be impacted, but if they follow the low value approach, so that is sell cheap but open, hardware only, then most likely Dell's going to be impacted. They've been very, very successful in forging partnerships around their open networking switch with their OPX operating system as well, and other open switch suppliers could be impacted, EdgeCore, Acton, and so forth. So option 2 here is if they choose to partner with existing network operating system vendors, then the impact is modest, as the majority of enterprise IT customers are reluctant to abandon full service IT. What I mean by that is most enterprise IT customers feel that they need a full service, they need sales reps, they're happy to pay 30 or 40% of the sale price as sales and marketing to come in, to buy them steak dinners, to have the sales reps and pre-sales work to make sure that it will work and de-risk these situations. If it really just gets down to the point where Amazon sells a switch and leaves it open for other people to partner with it, then the status quo is unchanged. So if depending on your thesis about where Amazon's going, I don't think so. There's also the possibility it's not a switch at all, it's actually a router. So on-ramp to the cloud model means that you need an SD-WAN style appliance, not a switch. Now this to me is a far more compelling debate that what the journalists involved here might have heard switch, but it's actually an appliance. Or maybe they're thinking, heard the word Whitebox and automatically appended switch, and what we're talking about is a Whitebox device as an on-ramp. Now we've seen Amazon do plenty of other quite unusual projects, for example with the Snowball, to go out and get data and to be able to transfer vast amounts of data to the cloud in the back of a truck. This would be a similar sort of an idea in the sense that they're building an appliance which is an on-ramp to the cloud. If that happens, then SD-WAN market is under threat. Valuations of vendors who are making SD-WAN products are definitely under threat, including the entire startup ecosystem who've been making enterprise IT. And a big part of the selling pitch there is multi-cloud. That is, you have a branch and it can talk directly to the internet, it can talk down to the data center, but it can also talk directly to AWS. And you have an SD-WAN edge in the cloud so that you can then transparently transfer in unsafe or insecure data directly to the cloud. Or if you're consuming cloud-based services, it breaks out at the edge and heads off directly, faster, improved, lower cost. This is probably I think the thing I'll be watching for. I think this is more likely than Amazon building a Whitebox switch. But then again, there's not enough information to go on here. There's only one article from the information that we have to go on so far. The final one is, of course, as if Amazon goes into a full service, which is a head-on attack into what Cisco, Arista, and Aruba, Extreme, and Juniper have done for years. Because Amazon could come in and just take easy sales for very good profits. In other words, your margin is my opportunity. At the end of the day, Amazon has zero cost here. They already have a switch that they use, so selling it out directly to customers is all profit effectively. They already have the product and inventory management, they already have support. They would obviously build some sort of online capability or some sort of cloud managed opportunity, maybe even a networking cloud service to help manage these types of things. They have the infrastructure, they've proven and demonstrated that they're willing to build products in these spaces where the margin exists or where it makes sense for them to do so. So where is the threats? So I think there's several weaknesses here. One is negative reviews by low-skilled customers. If you put a product out there and then somebody buys it and they flub it, they give you negative reviews. Products on Amazon that get negative reviews don't tend to sell well. And Amazon needs to get adoption from not just the people in the know, but the people out of the know. That's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how they handle that. SFP modules and QSFP modules, we have pluggable modules that go in the front of these switches. Those interfaces are still not very standardized. They're not very stable. And somebody has to take the risk for integrating those. There are no good answers for that today. Thirdly, so it's not a product for the entire enterprise IT market, but are there enough enterprise IT customers who would be willing to buy this? Is this a big enough market segment to make this viable? Amazon needs to do things at scale to move the needle unless they're a secondary objective. Brings more customers into AWS somehow, I'm with you. If it builds the IoT edge, I'm with you. But are there enough customers who are going to take this non-conventional model to market? I don't know. I'm open. Fourth threat is possibly is that that enterprise IT vendors like Cisco are strongly selling their SDN controllers. I do think that they probably foresaw this to some level, or they've foreseen that Whitebox is obviously a threat to them, and they've now moved into selling their SDN controllers tightly integrated with their operating systems, and in Cisco's case, continue to build custom hardware with minor tweaks to make it better. You know, I've got a shiny metallic paint job that nobody else has, therefore you need my shiny metallic paint job. I don't think the features are significant, but they're definitely a selling edge. So it is possible that the enterprise IT vendors can just move up the stack and lay over the top of whatever it is that's out there and sell an vertically integrated solution, and Amazon won't get the penetration it wants. I think obviously AWS is aware of that and knows well, but it is a potential threat. And finally, software integration with third-party vendors. If AWS chooses to put a NOS together, and remember, a NOS is not a single thing; it's actually dozens of different components. So if the software integration with other SDN controllers is needed, then how's AWS going to do that? And there's a lot of certification and commitment and validation. So this leads me to think that Amazon probably isn't going to play in the bottom of the market. They're not looking to sell these things in ones and twos. They're looking to sell these things in the hundreds to 200s at a time to people who know how to cope with these. There is a lot of companies out there who are looking for alternatives. Certainly in the discussions that I'm having, the pricing and the high price of networking, some companies want to stay safe and secure. They want to outsource risk. They don't have the competency to handle these types of things themselves. Equally, there are a number of customers who are spending large sums who are in a situation where buying a white box is actually quite difficult. So a white brand, as we call it, or a bright box, so that it's a white box sold by a vendor, is doing very well. We've seen the vendors almost completely abandon their proprietary silicon or their own switch development processes to come up with, and even start to sell them openly. So Cisco, Juniper are all selling their switches without a network operating system for those people who want them. So there is definitely a market for these things. If Amazon starts selling these switches to mid-tier data center providers who are looking for a switch that does their needs, that's a big enough market. So maybe it's a restricted market, or maybe there's a minimum volume. There's some random thoughts. I'm not sure where I stand on this. I do think that Amazon AWS looks at enterprise IT as a feast on which it can have. Very high profit margins in enterprise IT. Gross margins are at 65%. And a lot of that money is literally sales and marketing. There's a possibility that just by disrupting that process that Amazon can get ground in there. Certainly the whole premise behind AWS. So if Amazon's got something here to tell us, still doubt that Amazon is just going to sell switches unless it attacks a particular market, as I've already said. It has all the wherewithal, it has the switches, it has the stock. There's plenty of reasons as to why it would, but there are also reasons as to why it might not. And I also have questions in the back of my mind about whether this is actually a network device, some sort of x86 box running some sort of software-defined WAN capability to onboard enterprises into AWS, and the reporting didn't quite get the entire story. Who knows? We'll see. I'm Greg Farrow from the Packet Pushers. If you've liked this and you're interested, please join our membership system at ignition.packetpushers.net and follow us on the Packet Pushers, where we publish podcasts on the data networking industry every single week. Thanks.